Hey everyone, thank you for joining today with the Rapsodo webinar. Today we got some really exciting guests that we're going to introduce here in a second. So today's topic is going to be Inside the War Room, Technology's Impact on the MLB Draft. So my name is Brian Page. I've been with Rapsodo since I was playing college ball in Indiana in 2016. So as we were launching our first 1.0 unit, my senior year, I got to throw in front of that and join Rapsodo and be with Rapsodo ever since. So today I work with all of our MLB partners and then also other partnerships as well. So the USA Baseballs of the world and the showcases. Very fortunate to have great contacts around the baseball industry. So very excited to introduce our panel here today. We have JJ Cooper and Russell Hartford. So guys, maybe we can start with you, JJ. Do you mind giving a quick background of kind of what you do, Baseball America?
Sure. I'm editor-in-chief at Baseball America, which means I do a little bit of everything. And when I mean everything, we just launched an updated website, which means I've been dealing with customers if they're having trouble logging in. I've been writing SQL queries to try to pull information out of our databases that we're moving over to, but most importantly, I've been covering baseball for Baseball America now for almost 21 years. Draft, minors, majors, high schools. But that's one of the fun things about what we get to do is we cover it at, we've got our class of 2025 draft rankings up. And I kind of got to do a deep dive on Roki Sasaki yesterday, with the MPB and the best pitcher in Japan. So it's fun to have kind of be able to say, well, what do you cover? It's like baseball. So that's what we do.
Awesome. And then also, like I said, we got Russell Hartford, another good friend of Rapsodo's over the years. Russell at USA Baseball, you mind kind of giving a background there as well, Russell?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the Senior Director of Technology at USA Baseball. I've been with the organization for 9 years now. And just like JJ said, that kind of means I do a little bit of everything. So I work with all of USA Baseball's technology partners. I oversee a variety of programs and work closely with our prospect development pipeline, which is a joint initiative that we run with MLB, where we're going around the country and collecting a lot of data on amateur prospects. And that leads right into the MLB Draft Combine, where I'm also closely involved.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks guys for the quick background. Just for the audience as well, a little later on, we're going to be bringing on Nick Bitsko. He was in 2020 was a first round pick for the Tampa Bay Rays, I think 24th overall. He's an athlete we worked with a lot at Rapsodo, so excited to hear from him as well. Well, guys, with the background, thanks for that. We can kind of dive into some of the topics we're going to cover. What we're looking at covering today is we're going to go into detail on the MLB Combine recap. Really exciting to hear kind of with Russell being there at the Combine. USA Baseball has been awesome putting on with all the Combine stuff over the years. It's been great for the game of baseball. So we'll dive into that. Also, MLB Draft recap. We're going to hear a lot from JJ on that one, as our expert on everything draft related. So very excited about that. We're going to cover a little bit about technology and scouting and the MLB in general. I go to spring training every year. I work with our MLB clubs and affiliates throughout the whole year. So we'll cover that, and then we'll hear from Nick Bitsko. So that's kind of the agenda today. Did want to also mention for everyone joining, please send over any questions. If it's, for me at Rapsodo, Russell or JJ or anything Bitsko brings to the table. We have a Q&A that's live, so we will get to that at the end. So if you do have questions, please, we encourage you to ask those questions, and we'll get to them at the end so we can cover that Q&A. So yeah, to start, I think we kind of just covered the MLB Combine. Maybe we can start with you on that, Russell, with USA Baseball being such a big part of the Combine. Like I said, it's been so exciting for baseball. We're fortunate at Rapsodo to be utilized heavily at the Combine. I just kind of wanted to start, Russell, with, what's that process look like, at the Combine? How is technology utilized? And what's that look like kind of overall at the Combine?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really exciting event for us to be involved with. It's now just completed its third year. So the first year we hosted at the USA Baseball National Training Complex in Cary, North Carolina. Last year we were at Petco Park in San Diego, and this year we were at Chase Field, the home of the Diamondbacks in Arizona. It's a really awesome event, and more than anything, it's an opportunity for clubs to get a lot of context and a lot of information on the top draft prospects. All of the guys who get invited to the Combine are pretty well known for them to get to the point where they receive that invite. But this is an opportunity to get a lot of like information on these players, get them all in one place and collect a lot of data. Everything from on-field baseball performance data with Rapsodo and other technologies to physical performance data. We're doing 30-yard dashes. We're doing jump assessments, all kinds of body measurements, strength assessments. There's also a huge medical component that goes on behind the scenes. And also probably just as important as all the information that gets collected, there's an opportunity for the players to meet with the clubs and do club interviews. So you get that objective information from all the assessments, and then you have the opportunity for the players to interact one-on-one with the various clubs all in one place. I'd also say it's a really great opportunity for young players to start building their brand. As players are getting ready to launch their professional careers, this is an event where they can get a lot of exposure and start to establish themselves in the space before they even make it to the majors.
Awesome. Yeah, we here we're out of St. Louis, the Rapsodo office. So we had it on all the TVs throughout all the days of the combine. So yeah, it was one awesome. We just love the combine in general, like you said, Livy in the third year. I think it's great for the game. Seeing the Rapsodo, getting all the hitting data, the live BP on the field. We loved it. A question I had is, so I started meeting with MLB clubs in like 2016, 2017, where I may show up to, spring training, and maybe the players that have been established veterans haven't thrown on technology. Of course, the end game had been established, but maybe hadn't seen as much in the bullpen setting. So I bring that up because sometimes it was, why are they tracking this information? I think we maybe seen a change in that with the younger players that are seeing it at the PDP. They're seeing it at academies and even some high schools. I just want to ask you, Russell, with you being there and so involved, kind of what's that feedback with the players? Are they, open to that technology? They're used to it and excited to see it. They kind of know how that helps them in their journey, or what's that like in the feedback of the players?
I think you get a really wide range. Players are certainly becoming more and more accustomed to technology. Through the PDP, we assess between 3,000 and 5,000 players every summer. So we'll go all over. And this is players as young as 12 years old, all the way up to elite college players. So they're getting a lot of exposure to technology early on. I think the younger players are more and more accustomed to it and more interested in it. A lot of those elite level guys at the combine are very familiar with technology and work with it on a day-to-day basis. It's part of their training, it's part of their development. You get other players who aren't as familiar, and it's an opportunity for them to get introduced to different types of technology. Regardless, it's becoming really important in minor league systems, and it's becoming really important at the highest level. So whether a player is totally accustomed to it, has spent a lot of time with technology, or if it's new to them, it's of a lot of value for them to get exposed to it at the combine.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great to hear. One of the things, I work with throughout the year with all of our MLB partners is we see more and more units being utilized in places like the Dominican Republic, so they do find that next Ellie De La Cruz or someone like that it's just cool to see each club also on the MLB side, grow that data collection on that side. So JJ, you're the guy that's kind of always on top of all these draft picks. Before this call, you're talking about, the 2025 coming out. You've got your eye on all these guys. So you're very familiar. But, watching the combine, like, were there guys that before the draft that kind of was, catching your eye, getting on your radar even more based on their combine performance?
The guy, I'm going to go back to 2 combines ago for this because it's, I think, the perfect example. A guy like Jacob Bizarowski, who we saw this year in the Futures game, who starred. There are guys like that where, especially, generally what you're going to see is the guys who perform at the combine. You're not going to see Paul Skeens go out there and throw a pen, and you're not going to see Dylan Cruz, because they don't need, those are the guys who it's like, okay, we have this incredibly long body of work. But the combine is absolutely the opportunity, as far as the on-field performance, for a Jacob Bizarowski who's coming out of a little bit less traditional type of an environment, JUCO environment, to show, hey, my stuff is every bit as good. And that's one of the things when you talk about the data, when you talk about Rapsodo, like I wrote about this last year about how we've seen fewer junior college hitters be drafted reasonably high in recent years, but we've seen more junior college pitchers. And the reason for that is that I think partly is that because hitting is reactive and pitching is kind of proactive, teams have very good confidence that if they have the analytical data about a pitcher, they can reasonably extrapolate how that will play against pro hitters. There's a little bit, obviously, understandably, more concern if you have someone who hasn't faced as much quality pitching. How well, you may know that they can hit the ball really hard. In BP, you may know that they can hit the ball really hard consistently with a very low whiff percentage, very low in zone miss, all these things that we're tracking. You may know that, but if you're like, well, but he's facing 86 and without any, really good breaking balls, you have more concern than you do with the pitchers. But the thing that also just impresses me, and, Russell, and you guys and everyone, the tech that's there at the combine, Russell mentioned they're 30, they do the 30 at the combine, right? And I remember asking some of the MLB guys, why do y'all do 30? Like, traditionally, everyone does 60s. Like, oh, he runs a 6.8 60. He's a 7.5 60. And well, I love this. It was not, oh, we decided to be a little different. It was, we've done the research. You get everything you need data-wise out of a 30. That's going to tell you about their burst. That's going to tell you about their speed, all those things. And on top of that, the likelihood of injury goes down if you run a 30 compared to a 60. And again, as someone who loves data, who loves this kind of stuff, I love the fact that it's being examined and investigated. Hey, let's not just do this way because it's always been done that way. We can change things if it can be done better. And that's a perfect example to me of trying to figure out a way to do something better using data rather than just say, we're going to do the same old.
Sure. Yeah, I love the point about the pitching versus hitting decisions. Kind of, again, working with the MLB clubs, one of the big parts of the year is, getting Rapsodo data funneled to them. And some really interesting conversations we had in the last couple of years as teams, of course, will value different attributes of the pitch that others may not as much. Like, I think for me, I remember the Astros being one of the first teams publicly to like the 12 o'clock spin. Like, we're going to go up in the zone. We're going to create ride. We're going to get guys out up due to high efficiency backspin. Well, we do have certain filters for clubs where if Rapsodo data, in the training environment we now have where you can select high intent. Well, a team may want to see anytime a guy pops over 90 miles per hour, over 2,500 RPMs, like on a fastball, or maybe closer to 2,800 on a curveball. Like, we want that data to make its way to us. So it's always interesting to me, like the clubs and the different attributes they look at. Because a great point, JJ, is the pitcher controls so much of the game, right? On what they throw at the hitter. And can an elite high school kid like a Max Clark, sure, like definitely has the attributes to hit that well, but you don't really know till they get there. So it is very interesting when clubs make that decision. Do we go a college arm that's, 3 years in the SEC that's established? Do we take a high school arm? It's always very interesting to us as we dive into that data collection. So love that point of the hitting versus pitching.
Absolutely. And the other part with all of this is that it's like you said, different teams have different desires, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes those change. And sometimes those change because one of the other things I love about this is don't think of this as a dartboard and there's a bullseye in the middle. And if you hit that bullseye, you're good. And you can just keep hitting that bullseye. There are certain things that always will be true, but think of it more like a bullseye, but it's on a moving target, right? Because to go to an extreme example, but if you think back 10 years ago, the Pirates were really at the forefront of shifting, back when shifting was fully legal at the major league level and you could do wherever you wanted. But also they were sinkers. They were a sinker ball team down in the zone, generate ground balls. We're going to shift guys so that our defensive efficiency is going to go up and it'll pay off. And that was great. It really worked for them for a period of time. But what then happened, partly with, due to the technology like Rapsodo, we saw hitters rework swings. Okay. Everyone says the launch angle swing, not that, but it's not really that. It's more of optimizing your swing. But You had more hitters who were looking for balls down in the zone. That was the sweet spot of where their swing was going to be at its most optimal. And so by doing something that was ahead of the curve, the Pirates were ahead of the curve, but then the target shifted. And so then they were behind for a little while, I feel like, because the game had adapted to that. And that's where you said, like, there are teams, you say, well, why do some teams look for some things and some teams look for some others? Because there are different ways to do this. And I do feel like that, like, okay, to give an example, the 12 o'clock spin, the high, ride fastball at the top of the zone. Now, if you throw if you're Garrett Cole, that your fastball is still probably the best fastball in the game right now. But a guy who in 2017, 2018 had a well above average fastball attributes as far as movement, 12 o'clock spin, ride at the top of the zone, the game's shifted to that. So that may be now more average. And the problem with this is, as that becomes average, hitters are now, how it works, visual chunking and all, what used to be abnormal is now normal. And because it's normal, they're now more able to hit it because they've gotten used to seeing it. Whereas if you're unusual doing something else, that may be more difficult for them because they're not used to seeing it.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's when we get questions from someone maybe new to Rapsodo, say a pitching coach that has an academy, or maybe they just got a pitching job at a college or whatever it is. One recommendation we make at Rapsodo that we've learned from other coaches and organizations is just get a baseline on the players. So do you understand if, sure, we can see the velocity with, a radar gun and naked eye, right? But are they naturally low spin rate? Are they naturally high spin rate? Because then you can say, hey, maybe this is the right arsenal for you. Maybe you can go up the zone, or maybe you do have more of a natural sinker. We're going to get ground balls, right? So yeah, I love that. One thing I think after the draft happens is, you see all these, this team had a great draft. This player was unexpected and really exciting. Like, there's fun picks, right? So I know a guy that, Russell and I have talked about before, the 20th pick to the Blue Jays, Arjan Nimala. I know, Russell, that's a guy you had some data on and kind of had caught your eye in some of your events. If you want to share, about that with Arjan.
Yeah, we were talking about this. And this was a pick that certain people in the media had expressed as being an unexpected pick, just because the middle infield's really deep in this draft. So we had talked about him, and I thought, we have Rapsodo hitting data on him because he was at the 2022 PDP League. And I looked him up, and he's one of the hardest hitters in the entire PDP League. He had in BP 15 hits that were over 100 miles per hour, including a ball that was 106 miles per hour off the bat for 426 feet. So just an example of a guy who, if you look at the data, it shows a lot of strength. And we saw the same thing in his grip strength measurements. So he's kind of one of those guys who's maybe deceptively strong and just shows a lot of power in his data.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And then I know, JJ, you've got some guys too. Is there any cool stories, any picks that kind of caught your eye where it's either a neat story or exciting pick?
Sure, but to just kind of add in on the Mala a little bit to start off with, one of the things I think that's kind of notable with him is you throw into that you're also looking at, okay, the draft is all about projection. The Mala is also one of the youngest guys in this draft class. So the thing that does stand out with that is that you're talking about someone who has really impressive present raw power that is still 17. He's a guy who the funny thing about this is I think it is possible to overrate age in the draft. And sometimes teams, I think, have gotten in trouble by getting too enamored with, oh, this guy's 17 or this guy's 19. Bobby Witt Jr. was 19. Brett Beatty was 19. Those guys were old for the class, but if you can play, you can play. But when you have a guy who has these kind of tools already, and then you say, well, on top of that, you have a guy who has more development ahead of him than a 19-year-old, than a 21-year-old. That makes it even more interesting. To me, I'm kind of fascinated. I'll kind of start at the top of this class. Like, this was a fascinating debate this year, and one that I don't think, what I love about all this, doesn't have easy answers, right? You have two guys on the same team. If you're the Pirates, you're sitting there at number one. And I've been asking people this all last fall, all spring, all summer. So who do you take? And you hear very convincing arguments either way, right? Which is Dylan Cruz or Paul Skeens. Do you take the position player who, by being a position player, is safer, right? Without a doubt. But at the same time, position players, it is easier. Like if we look at this trade deadline coming up at the major league level, and you say, I need an outfielder to join, we need to help in the outfield. I promise you, you will be able to find that, and probably at a not particularly expensive price on the trade market. The flip side is Paul Skeens, who had just had one of the great years we've seen in college baseball from a pitching side of the 21st century. If you need a front of the rotation ace, we don't know that he's going to become that, but say he does. Well, you're going to pay, if it's even available in this year's trade deadline, you're going to basically give up a massive ransom. To give an example, the Braves won the World Series a couple of years ago after trading for Jorge Soler and Eddie Rosario. And I'm not saying these are great players, but they're good players. But they didn't give up anything almost. Adam Duvall. They got 3 outfielders at the trade deadline and didn't give up any top 100 prospect, in the deals. If let's just not even say it's throw Shohei Ohtani out. If a Justin Verlander moves at the deadline, it's going to be, even with that massive contract, it's going to be really expensive to get him prospect wise. That's where I love the debates on this is, do you take a Skeens and you take the risk of a pitcher? And by the way, to tie it in with this, who has incredible velocity, but a movement profiles that are good, not great. Or do you take the Dylan Cruz, who is the more of the well-rounded outfielder who has had an incredibly productive career, but as incredibly productive as career as that has been, wasn't necessarily even the most productive hitter in college baseball this year. You could argue a couple of other guys who were in that first round as well. I love debates like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm actually want to give a shout out, JJ. You obviously have awesome articles that I'm sure a lot of people on the call follow. I know we do at Rapsodo. But back in July 10th, the how often do first rounders make it to the big leagues article. I know you and I discussed this, but there's some awesome information in there. Definitely encourage everybody to check it out if you haven't already seen it. But something that stood out to me is 3 of the first 4 picks, outfielders, right? First time ever. Mm-hmm. You're watching the draft, following that. I didn't necessarily make that connection. It kind of goes to the point you're mentioning of like taking an outfielder versus a pitcher, but just the outfielders just so good at the top of the board there. Like, why do you think we're seeing, 3 out of 4 outfielders when there are legit college arms on the board after Skeens?
It is crazy, but it is amazing how this changes from year to year, right? We had, it's been a few years now, obviously, but we had the year where 3 shortstops, that's a little less unusual, but 3 shortstops went at the top of the draft, where we had Swanson, Bregman, and Rogers at the top of the draft in 2015. You have years where you have great outfielders, you have years not. This was like a perfect combo where you had 2 truly, incredibly productive college outfielders. And then you had 2, like when we talk about the high school outfielders, one of the things that I do think has also changed, and what you guys do, what Russell does at USA, what USA Baseball does and other places do, has kind of reduced, I think in a lot of ways, the risk that used to be involved with drafting a high school position player, because we now do know more than we did back 25 years ago. And one of the reasons we do that is like when you're talking about a Max Clark or you're talking about a Walker Jenkins. I remember when Byron Buxton was drafted, by the Twins in 2012, and I was talking to one of their scouts who scouted Buxton, and I said, so during that spring, because Byron Buxton, I'm from Georgia. He was from kind of small town Georgia. They said, what was the best pitcher that you all saw Byron Buxton face? And they said there was one guy who Mike could sign with a junior college, who was, I think, 86 to 88, right? But you'd seen him on the showcase circuit. You'd seen him at USA Baseball events. You'd seen him against top quality pitching. I don't have a whole lot of concern right now with a Max Clark, can he hit quality pitching? Well, he's faced pretty much every peer of his at the same age who's pro caliber talent. And not only that, but he was facing the guys who got drafted last year, because he was one of the better hitters on the circuit 2 summers ago, facing the guys who were drafted last year. That's where it is different now than it was. And on top of that, now you can say, like, it's not just that again, I'm old. I remember when it was like you would see BP, see how far he hit it. And that would give you an idea of how much power a guy had, which is still useful. But now it is like, okay, here's how often he hits it. 100-mile-an-hour plus. This is his 90th percentile exit velocity. This is the his average launch angle. You have those things now to add to round out the picture that we used to not have.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think a lot of credit, goes to like the USA Baseballs of the world that get all these athletes, around each other, competing against each other. Russell, I've been out to PDP with you, had the chance to meet up with you in Philadelphia a few years back. You mentioned it before, but I think that goes such a long way for these top prospects. I know we're talking draft and combine, but I would love to talk about that a little bit too in the PDP. What's the process of getting those guys to your event? Is it, a lot of recruiting on your end? You guys know where the hot players are around the country and do the PDP, but if you want to share a little bit of information about that, I think to JJ's point, it gets a guy like Max Clark that, from my hometown in Indianapolis, not a lot of pitchers in the draft traditionally, but you do get them in front of, top pitchers and events like that. If you want to talk a little in the PDP, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so we see guys through a really wide range of avenues. This week we have our 16 and 17U national team development program going on, and all those guys are getting evaluated. We've got the Rapsodos out there today, getting all the hitting data, getting all the bullpen data as well. These are guys who've been working their way through USA Baseball events all summer. So they've been at our ID events, and they've been selected as the top 16 and 17-year-olds in the country from our programming. So we see guys like that who've gone through the process with us. They've started at a much larger event, and they've been funneled down as the best of the best. We also go to where the players are. So we go to East Coast Pro tryouts, and we go to the East Coast Pro main event. We go to Collegiate Summer League All-Star events. We were just at the Coastal Plain League All-Star game just recently, and we were at the Appalachian League Scout Day as well. We partner with MLB for all of their developmental events. So we have a team down at the Hank Aaron Invitational where they've gone through their process to select a lot of the elite players in the country. So we see a lot of guys through the USA Baseball national team system, where we're looking to identify and select the top players in the country to represent Team USA. And we're taking them through the PDP process as a part of that. And that helps us develop and select those players. And it also helps build that PDP database that's going to the 30 clubs. And then we also get on the road and we travel all over. I mean, we go through the airport with a ton of equipment. We go wherever we need to go, and we get in front of the players and take them through the assessment and collect that information. And, the other thing I'll mention is, as we're doing this, of course, we're using that information to select players for Team USA. We're filtering it to the clubs so that they can help with their draft process. But we're also giving all that information back to the players. So every player who we see gets a really detailed report from us. So it's just as much about getting the information to the player so that they know where they stand and they have the tools and the information to help in their development, as it is for us to use it as an evaluation tool.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And we're super fortunate to be working with you guys the way we have. So love seeing you helping all these players, around the country and getting them, seen. With it being the topic of the draft, a draft thing I kind of had in my notes here is, correct me if I'm wrong, JJ, but we saw one high school arm in the first round, right? Noble Meyer.
Yep.
So is that, kind of talk to that a little bit? Is that just hate to bring up COVID, but is that from what happened with the years of eligibility, why we see these dominant arms, or kind of what's that look like with like the college versus high school arm this year's draft?
I think it's a little bit of both. Obviously, you still see like that when you have, we saw it last year, we saw it the year before, when you have a guy who really stands out as a high school arm, you can still go in the first round. That said, I would say that there are clubs where you would almost have to be a level or two on their board above everyone else for them to consider taking a prep pitcher in the first round. And the reason for that is not as much like, again, we have more data. We have the quality of stuff. We have things now that we didn't have 20 years ago. But I think more than anything, the high school pitcher has not gone through, I mean, it's a terrible term, but the injury nexus that happens in your 18, 19, 20, 21 years, right? So I think a lot of clubs do look at it and say, especially at the very top of the draft class, if we take a college arm there, one, we're in a smaller minor league system now, right? We're in a system where if you're not ready to head to low A at the start of your first full season, so next 2024 for these draftees, well, then it's going to be a tough development path because there isn't that Pioneer League, that New York Penn League, that Northwest League that there used to be where, okay, we're going to start you in the complex in year one, but then we're going to move you out to a more advanced, but also not particularly advanced level the next year. Now you're either in the complex, which means you're back there in the complex in 24, or you're going to low A, which is because you better be pretty advanced to be able to handle going to low A in your first year. So there's that. But I think a lot of it is you feel more comfortable with these college pitchers that they've shown they can hold up over 12, 15 starts over, in most cases, multiple years, and their stuff holds up and they've stayed healthy. Or if they have been injured, they've come back from it and you're comfortable that they've come back from it and they're at full speed. That is something I think that weighs more heavily on teams' minds in the draft now, because again, we've just had so much data about it. You do still find examples of pitchers, high school pitchers. I think if you go back to the middle of last decade, right? 2015, 2014, 2015, you had guys like Tyler Kolek. You had guys who had great stuff in high school, but they had trouble maintaining that kind of into the minors. And I think that we've had college pitchers get hurt too, but for some reason, the success rate has been better on college pitchers, which I think in a very analytics and data heavy environment means we see more teams trending that way.
Right. And we've seen in the past too, some guys get fast tracked, right? To your point, they had more workload in college. They're of course older, maybe a little more developed, more used to stretching out that pitch count, face against high, level hitters. Is there anybody that we're looking at like fast tracking here that's on your mind right now that we may see in the MLB, like a Brandon Finnegan pitching in multiple World Series, that type of thing? Is there anybody we should keep an eye out for there?
So I really came out of the draft wondering if Rhett Lauder, the Reds' first round pick out of Wake Forest, look, Paul Skeens, if you told me that Paul Skeens, the workload he had, he's not going to pitch, I don't believe again this year, if anytime really before the Arizona Fall League. But if you told me that Paul Skeens came to spring training next year and the Nationals, I don't think they will, but the Nationals looked around, they may say he's the second or third best pitcher we have right now, because that's how good he is. But in Lauder's case, who really had probably the second best year in college baseball behind Skeens, I kind of looked at it and said, the Reds could use some starting pitching. Is there any way that, not that he's fully ready, but he's coming out of a Wake Forest program that is the envy. The Wake Forest pitching lab is the envy of many pro teams, that they wish that they had all of the tech and all of the biomechanics and everything that Wake does. Because he a guy who could do that. And then, but the reality of it is with the draft now being in July when it is, with the long college season, with the fact that these pitchers ramp up really starting in late January, it's just hard to kind of imagine a guy doing that now, because teams understandably are cautious with this and say, okay, we may see Rhett Lauder next year, because I'll give Reed Detmers as an example. We saw Reed Detmers move very quickly. We've seen, we saw Ben Joyce, again, make it to the majors in about a minute and a half after he was drafted. But what we have now is understandably like, okay, with Rhett Lauder, I don't know if he couldn't help the Reds this year, but I do think that the Reds understandably look at it and say the risk of trying to ramp him back up to help us in August or September is probably too much. We'll aim for 24 or 25. But I think those two guys are two guys who stand out especially well because they are dominant pitchers, but of the new era. And what I mean by that is they've been pretty well optimized for what they are. I mean, this gets overused, but Paul Skeens literally had a major league pitching coach this year because LSU hired the pitching coach who was the pitching coach for the Twins at the moment where they hired him. It's not, they have the same tech that they have at the major league level. They have the same instruction. It's not the same thing as it was 30 years ago, where you had this massive gulf between the two levels, I think.
Yeah, I love that answer with Louder, just with the Reds being a surprise team this year. They've got some banged up young pitching with Green and Lodolo right now. They may make it around to Central, just right behind the Brewers. So that's a great question. It's always really exciting to see a guy that does get in the draft and kind of fast track, where, a lot of these draft picks do take time to make it up to the bigs. To steal another thing from your article, I think it's just such a fun fact to share is, 81% of the pitchers, first round pitchers, get an MLB strikeout, but only 14% get to 1,000, right? Which is pretty, a big number of a lot of innings. But it's just very interesting with how many arms there are, how many guys get drafted, but how many, it's such a low percentage, get to that, like the 1K mark on strikeouts. But I love the Louder example. That's a really good one.
Getting there is hard. Staying there for a long time is way harder.
Right. Well, that's awesome, JJ. I know we're going to bring in Nick Bitsko from the Rays here in a little bit. But I have a question for you, Russell. Just with how involved you are with the prospects before maybe they're on the big stage, right? What does that change in like the scouting conversations if you're having those? Like, so we've seen this technology, right, where you mentioned you do a lot of awesome things at like PDP and combine with grip strength, like the hang time, like the running, 30 yards or 60 and all of that. So you do get a really full picture of the athlete. But if there are like the scouting conversations, how does that change for you guys on now that you have, the hitting data and reports to share from Rapsodo, you have pitching reports? Does that kind of change that flow of getting guys recruited and drafted?
So for us, and I can maybe speak a little more to our national team selection process, because that's where we're a lot more dialed in on looking at guys, and use of data and use of this information has become more and more relevant in our process. So we didn't used to ever have a data analytics person with every national team, and now we do. We didn't used to have a person in the room for scout meetings with reports available and with data available, and now we do. And so I think it's generally the direction that the game's been going, and that a lot of coaches and scouts are starting to head as well. We do often get the question of, how do the two coexist? The traditional scouting, what you see with your eyes, and what you're seeing through the data. And what I always say, and I think it's true, is that the two should be complementary, and they should be informing. One should be informing the other. And if there's a conflict there, then you've got something wrong on one side of the equation. Either you are looking at the wrong thing in your data, or you're interpreting it correctly, or you have some other subjective interpretation going on. So we always work to, we don't want what we're doing with technology and with data and collecting this information to replace anything that's going on in the subjective scouting world, or to certainly not overrule anything that our scouts who have years of baseball experience and have been watching baseball for decades are seeing. If we're doing it right, then the information we're providing is just providing more context to what the scouts already see, and is enhancing their insights rather than ever working in conflict. And if we ever do find there's a conflict, it means that we need to look a little bit closer at what we're doing and figure out where that's coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. We've had that conversation at Rapsodo as well, that if there's ever any scouting thought of, a camera is going to replace what I go out and have done for a lot of years on finding talent. No, it's just a piece of the puzzle, right? You may be a coach that can teach a very good curveball. Well, check out the horizontal vertical break on, technology, and enforce, you can replicate that with that athlete and give them a visual. So very well said, Russell. But Nick, how's it going, man? Welcome to the webinar with JJ Cooper, Baseball America, Russell Hartford at USA Baseball. How you doing, man?
Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate you guys letting me come on and talk and stuff like that. So,
yeah, absolutely. Well, at the start, for our audience, kind of gave a little background that Nick, you had been drafted in 2020 in the first round of the Tampa Bay Rays. Worked a lot with you at Rapsodo and had an awesome video shoot out in San Diego. That for anyone that hasn't seen it, the team did a phenomenal job with Nick out there. So it is on our social media, it's on the website. So check it out. Nick's got an awesome story. But thanks again for joining us, Nick. Man, how are things going with the Rays, the development? What's that looking like?
Yeah, it's good right now. I'm currently rehabbing again, but kind of going through that process again. So I've been doing that for a little bit now. So just kind of getting back into the flow of things now. So just kind of starting to ramp up. So feeling good though. So good.
Cool. Well, one thing we were covering, man, was we were talking about the draft, right? With, you were out of high school, right? And you had it tough where the COVID years really affected your playing time at the high school level. Well, MLB teams have a lot of guys to pick from. If it's, the international timing, if it's a high school guy, or we're talking about this year, we saw a lot of college arms go, right? You have such an awesome story with that. Do you mind sharing a little bit about, your playing days in high school were a little limited? What that journey looked like? Because I think it's a powerful, cool story how you got, went the first round of the Rays.
Yeah. So obviously my story is a little bit different than I think other people's because I reclassified in high school. So I was supposed to be a graduate in the 2021 draft class. And then I obviously just graduating high school as well. And then I made the decision to move up a class. So I went to the 2020 class in, I think it was like January of 2020, but obviously I made the steps like prior to it to like elevate my grade level and stuff like that in school and stuff like that to finish that up. And then obviously at the time, COVID wasn't a thing. So I'm going into my senior season thinking, okay, I have a full senior season workload to show MLB scouts like what I have on the mound in games and stuff like that. And then obviously COVID hits in March and everything kind of shuts down. So I'm at a point where I don't have a lot of time in front of scouts and stuff like that, other than some stuff in the past summers in 2019. But obviously at the time they weren't looking at me as a guy eligible for drafting in 2020. So they were like, okay, hey, cool, let's keep him on the radar for 21, but we don't really need to be as in depth with this kind of stuff. So I was going into 20, using that senior season as that time to kind of get myself in front of scouts for them to be able to, analyze me and stuff like that. So I kind of went into that COVID thing. I was like, well, I don't really know what to do now. I was fortunate enough to have a facility nearby up in Philly that was, they were able to let me use the facility during that time during COVID. Obviously, it was a really select group of guys that were allowed in there just because of all the COVID protocols and stuff like that. So we were able to go in there. Fortunately, they had a Rapsodo unit in there. And then I started kind of throwing on that, started working with that kind of stuff, trying to use my pitches, trying to develop my repertoire. And then we kind of went from there. And then eventually we got to the point where we were sitting on all this data. And it was probably around May, right before the draft in June. And we were kind of talking, we were like, we might as well just put this stuff out there for teams to see, because it was more just like, how are we going to get this data to teams for them to be able to see this stuff? So I ended up putting it like on my social media, and it kind of went viral, like all over Twitter and stuff like that, with all the, Rapsodo did and stuff like that. So it was really cool to see. And then that obviously helped me get drafted in June. So it was really cool.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I know we've kind of had back and forth on that, and like in the video series, you kind of talked through it. But yeah, I mean, I remember it was such weird times, obviously, in that 2020 range with the high school seasons. But I remember my first memory was seeing those Rapsodo videos of you pumping upper 90s in the facility, still getting work in. And it's being like, dang, the video aspect of being able to see the mechanics, seeing you pump upper 90s and without a hitter in the box, just in the bullpen setting. It was my first, memory there, seeing you in the data. So one thing like Russell at USA Baseball does such a great job of is all those prospects getting their data, collected, kind of distributed. Can you talk to that at all? I know you kind of mentioned it, but that video, is there any tips for like young players now where, of course, they're not dealing with, the pandemic like you had to deal with, but just the ability to share video, share report, can you talk to how that helped you in your journey, and how often are you sending that out, different clubs, kind of what that looked like on saying, here's not only my raw data, but hey, here's video of my mechanics to take me in the first round.
Correct. Yeah. And I think it's changed a lot since that COVID year. Obviously, like now they have like the draft league and stuff like that. Like, and the draft's obviously pushed back farther now, like where it's in July versus in June. So I think that whole COVID year really changed how the draft is looked at now. I think a lot of teams like take this analytical approach to stuff like that, where they can just look at it and be like, okay, here's his data, here's the plot points. Obviously, maybe hey, he hasn't thrown a lot, but this is what, I think teams have a lot of like variables and data and stuff like that, where they can say like the stuff plus numbers and stuff like that, and being able to say like, hey, this is how this guy's grades out. So I think it's changed a lot in the past versus, okay, here's his workload against, especially for pitchers in general, because pitchers, I feel like it's easier to evaluate a pitcher versus a hitter, because a hitter has to go against guys who are going to be in pro baseball versus a pitcher who just has stuff. He has stuff. It's going to play no matter where he's at in any level. So I think it's changed a lot since the 2020 draft. So
cool. Yeah, JJ had an awesome point earlier on when he was talking when a club's determining versus taking a pitcher, taking a hitter. You and I had an awesome conversation out in San Diego where you're talking about just letting your stuff play to where, each teams have different things that they value, right? We talked earlier on, some teams want that if a guy can create that 12 o'clock backspin, go up in the zone, miss barrels that way. But you had mentioned to me that, a philosophy can be stay in the zone, let your stuff play, keep the pitch count down. If you could talk that philosophy, and is there anything new to the arsenal? I know we're thinking about you with getting through the injury, but what's that look like with the arsenal and philosophy there? Because I think it's something that, a lot of younger players can hear is if you are attacking hitters with plus stuff, like you said, man, you're going to get outs, even if you miss a spot here and there.
correct. Yeah. And I think that's a big philosophy for teams now is I think they just want guys to attack the zone instead of trying to nibble at the corners and stuff like that. Because obviously, if you go watch batting practice at a field, the guys are literally throwing the ball down the middle at 65 miles an hour, and they'll miss the ball every once in a while. So it's not like guys are perfect, even big league hitters. Obviously, they're the best of the best, but I think you can almost take that advantage of, okay, now you're going against a guy throwing, say, 90 miles an hour plus, 95 miles an hour plus. A lot of these guys nowadays, I think the average major league fastball nowadays is 95. So it's like everybody throws hard. So it's like the reaction times, you have to be quicker and stuff like that. And everybody's stuff is getting better and better. So it's almost like they almost value strikes more often now, where if you just put the ball in the zone and they know like the data backs up, okay, if they can get ahead, the data backs up that you're going to be more successful than when you're not. It's not going to be like, okay, hey, if I just throw a heater down the middle every single time or throw the ball over the plate, it's going to get hit. Not the chances are you're going to get the guy out most of the time. So I think like the batting average against, getting ahead 0-1 or something like that, or 0-0 fastballs is like 0.05 or some ridiculous number where it's just like, you might as well just throw the ball down the middle and, okay, hey, if the guy's a home run, the data backs up that the next guy's probably not going to hit a home run. So.
Sure, absolutely. And it's like you said, Nick, like we're seeing guys 95 to 100 more than ever. I personally believe the hardest thing in sports is hit a major league pitch at that high level. So you're going to be more successful times than you're not. So yeah, it's good feedback, man, there. You talked about like sharing the data, getting in that back home in Philly in that facility. Maybe kind of a broad question, but to those, we got a lot of people listening, hopefully some players too that kind of want to hear from you guys on how to get drafted and all that. Is there anything else kind of like on advice that you'd want to give just in general? It doesn't have to be Rapsodo data or anything like that, but just kind of help you along the way, just advice to those younger players on, what was successful for you to, get you to that level.
I think it's just being consistent with your process. I think you have to kind of buy into something, and obviously you have to buy into something that's helpful and not hurtful, obviously. But if you buy into something that you believe in and you think it's working and you've seen results from, and you consistently do that over and over again, I think you'll see good results in the long run. I think if you keep jumping around from different program to philosophy and stuff like that, where if you kind of stick with something, I think you'll see the long-term results and stuff like that in the long run, instead of just, okay, what's the quickest way I can do something, instead of how do you manage it in the long term. So
that's an awesome answer, man. I think like consistency there, like especially on the pitching side, is being able to show the clubs like consistency over time, that data, all that, rather than, that's a great point. So man, well, that's awesome. Appreciate you joining, Nick. Good best of luck with with the Rays. We know you're going through that injury, but excited to see you on the bump, man, at Rapsodo. So we for the Q&A, we had some stuff, but if we kind of want to open it, I know JJ Russell, you guys had shared some awesome information on the combine, and then also the draft. Kind of want to open up the floor. If we have a great audience right now. Anything that you guys that we didn't touch on maybe with the draft? I know JJ, you got facts for days on all the draft class, but anything if you guys kind of want to cover, we have about 8 minutes to kind of in our time slot, but we'd love to open it up to anything you guys would like to cover for USA, Baseball America, or whatever you guys would like to cover.
Well, I just want to ask Nick one, because one other thing I just want to ask with that, like using reps, so working out of a facility and all. The other thing, and I think Brian touched on a little bit before, but like it also, I kind of look at that. Does that help you does it speed up the feedback loop, right? Like if you're working on something, the thing that stands out to me is when you could look at the data you can more quickly, you know, when you combine that, especially with high speed video and all, you can can you more quickly figure out what you need to do or why something's not working or whatever, because you have that instant feedback loop of this is doing this, or here's how the ball's coming off my fingers?
Yeah, 100%. I think it obviously helps when you have the data like at your fingertips. Obviously, you have to have somebody who's able to put it into context of what you need to do next pitch. Like, obviously, if I go up there and spike a slider, and like I could be like, oh, that was a terrible pitch, but then the data says like, okay, hey, actually that wasn't terrible. So let's just make it so where it actually is a swingable pitch, or it's a productive, type of pitch. So I think being able to see the data is really helpful, but you also obviously have to know like, okay, now what am I aiming for? What's the actual end goal? And is that a productive result of that? And I think that helps in the long run, when you're using that Rapsodo. So.
Yeah, it's awesome. We talk about is just replicating, right? You may find something in the immediate feedback. Before the technology era is your catcher saying, hey man, I'll get out of the hand. Pitching coach says, I like that movement. But, when you see the spinning ball in the application, the break numbers, let's save that and replicate, right? So that's awesome, answer there, Nick, on how to utilize that. And, the slider may be in the dirt, but hey, it may have that. If you're looking for a gyro pitch, maybe it was very low efficient. Maybe that guy's going to swing over it. Like we see a lot of swing and misses, right, with the electric stuff in the league nowadays. So yeah, that's an awesome point, man, is that data can really tell all that story, and then you can save it and replicate it. But yeah, well, we got a little bit of time left. Anything on the USA Baseball?
A couple of things I wanted to kind of point out about the draft that I do think are interesting is I feel like that we saw this year. I'll give an example. Like I feel like the Marlins, which I think had an interesting draft. And one of the things I think that the Marlins did this year, which is interesting, is I think they went back to kind of what they do well, right? And you say, okay, what do you mean by that? But the last couple of years they've taken, they took a high school position player, Khalil Watson, in the first round in 2021. They took Jacob Berry at the first round last year. And to be charitable to both those guys, it hasn't gone as well as either of them would have hoped so far. Let's just say it that way. But you look at this year, I think if you say, what is the Marlins? What is their identity right now? The Marlins are really good at developing pitching. If you look at the guys that they've brought up through the system, and then you look at this year and Noblemeyer, the only prep pitcher to go in the first round, Thomas White, the 35th pick. They added some other kind of interesting college arms a little later, Emmett Olson, Andrew Lindsay, Jake DeLeo. I like that as a draft from the standpoint of, okay, I think that this is what they do well, right? That they do have a pretty good sense of how to develop pitching. And I love this about the MLB draft. You're just trying to acquire talent, right? You're not, this is, I love the NFL draft too, but the NFL draft, you're trying to fill needs, right? And you're drafting, you may think that this guy's the best in the draft class, but if you're like, well, we got a running back, or we've got a quarterback, or we've got an outside linebacker at that spot, you're not going to take them first round because your first rounder needs to play right away. We don't do that in the MLB draft. You take the talent. And I think back to, the Angels a couple of years ago literally took pitchers with every pick they had in the draft. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing that normally, but if it works out and you get talent from it and you develop it, you're not going to have a problem turning those pitchers into position players if you need to in trades, or you fill that from free agency. There's so many ways that you can put together a roster. I thought that was a draft that really did stand out to me as kind of interesting in the way they did it, because I do think it had kind of an emphasis on that. I also think you look at this, there's so many ways you can do it in the draft. You can front load it where you put all your eggs into your top couple of picks basket. You can back load it where you say, okay, we're going to spread the money around. You have teams, the Brewers, I thought was interesting. They, not high money, but they took 3 high school guys after the 10th round that they ended up giving well above the $150,000 limit, that they went into their draft pool to get those guys. But they did it in a way where it was kind of a little bit lower risk because they took them on day 3. And if they don't sign those guys, they don't lose bonus pool money from it. So I thought that was an interesting draft as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's about perfect timing. So thanks to all you guys, JJ, Russell, Nick. Always a pleasure talking with you guys. Nick, best of luck, man, with getting back on the mound. We're excited to follow that journey. I know you're going to crush it there, getting back on the mound. So thanks again. Kind of some key takeaways is the combine's great for baseball. USA Baseball, what they're doing there. Love watching it every year. Seems great for the players. Unique draft class every year, right? Like we saw things, and if you ever want to be fully, aware of what's going on in the draft, follow JJ stuff. It's always he's always got the inside scoop on kind of what that looks like for the different classes. And then technology just plays a huge role in that. So us at Rapsodo, we're fortunate to be a part of that, and appreciate all of our partnerships, and excited to see the game continue to grow. But and unless there's anything else from you guys, we can wrap it up. But just want to say thanks again to all of you. You've been great partners of Rapsodo, and really appreciate the time today on the webinar.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate the time. And Nick, great to meet you. I was just looking back at some of our stuff. It looks like we had you at 3 development programs for USA Baseball. So I was trying to see if I could pull some Rapsodo pitching data from you, but didn't have any from those years that you were with our development program as a 14, 16, and 17-year-old. But regardless, hope those were valuable experiences for you on your journey. To help you where you are now.
Yeah. No, 100%. Those were fun. Those were fun experiences. Obviously, like I think I got to play in Panama when I was 14, and then in 16 and 17, I got to do the development program. So that was really cool. Obviously, I didn't get to play for a national team, but maybe in the future here. So
yeah, absolutely. There also just was a question in the chat. Somebody had asked if we used the Rapsodo 3.0 with the combine. And did want to touch on that. We did use the Rapsodo Pro 3.0 at the combine, and we just got it this summer. It's been really cool to work with, and it was super helpful for the combine because that this part that you see on TV it's a scouted workout, but it's also a TV production. So it is like down to the minute what's happening. BP starts at like 1:12 p.m. on the dot, and then they transition to pitchers at 1:32 p.m. on the dot. And being able to use the same unit for hitting and pitching was so incredibly useful for that. And the battery life on the thing was great too. Normally we'd have to switch out different RCEs and monitors if we're doing a long day, but the 3.0 is a tank the whole way through. So did use the 3.0 and had a lot of success with it.
Awesome, man. We're glad to hear. Appreciate that. So if anyone out there, if you maybe do have a 2.0 right now, or you're interested in Rapsodo, looking to upgrade to 3.0, just reach out to our team. You can find us on the website, sales@rapsodo.com. But yeah, the 3.0, like Russell said, the battery life is a lot nicer there, especially if you're out at like an inter squad or practice a long time. And just getting live on live functionality is huge. It's the first time at Rapsodo. So really appreciate that, Russell. And thanks again, guys. Definitely we'll have to do it again, but appreciate you all joining. And this will be recorded too. So we'll make sure to share it. But thanks so much. So
thank you guys.
Awesome.
And good luck.